I finished Dubliners. It is the third book of Joyce's that I have completed. I just realized I read them backwards, in a way. I did not start with Finnegan's Wake. I read Ulysses first, and I'm actually working my way back through this now, 85 pages in. I've read it all the way through once, and I've read other bits a couple times. I'm enjoying it much more this time, having experienced these first sections several times at this point. I'm taking it slow. I'm really kind of enjoying the lyricism and just kind of the playfulness of the writing, and not worrying about understanding all that he's trying to do necessarily, but just reading it and enjoying it, and taking my time, not trying to get through it as fast as I can. I'm not 100% sure if I will read it all the way through, like straight through. I have read it all the way through before, so I'm just going to kind of take it as it comes and see what happens. I may read all of it. I may not. Depends on what else kind of crops up. But I'm enjoying what I'm reading regardless. And yeah, especially these early chapters. I definitely remember it getting more difficult as I get further into it. But yeah, very much enjoying it right now. And then Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. I really enjoyed, and having finished Dubliners now, kind of looking at kind of the progression. I think Dubliners and Portrait of the Artist both seem to have a lot more wrestling with religion. Joyce almost seemed like he was kind of past it in a lot of ways by the time he got to Ulysses, where it wasn't as much of a focus. I may be misremembering. I'm certainly no expert on Ulysses at all. But it seems like he focuses more on it, kind of in Dubliners, and particularly in Portrait of the Artist. That's one thing I remember a lot from reading this earlier this year. I wouldn't necessarily recommend starting with Ulysses like I did. I'm an insane person. Not to say you can't start with Ulysses, but I think most people would not recommend it. I just am me. And so, of course, I went. And the first time I tried to read it, failed. Made it through the second time. And then I've just kind of been dipping in and out of it in the year and a half or so since, whenever the fancy strikes. But Dubliners. I liked the later stories, I think, a lot more than the earlier ones. And I think some of that may have to do with I didn't necessarily realize this at first, but I think as the further you get into the stories, the older the narrators and the people populating the stories are. And so I think perhaps I liked the later ones because they were more centered around adults and not so much children. But there was also some just really good, what was it? I'm trying to remember. There's some good like humor and some just really good writing, of course, in it. But there's this one story where this gentleman is working, and he's meant to be copying the pages out. I think it's this one called Counterparts. And he's meant to be kind of copying out these papers for his job. And he keeps saying, like, he keeps putting it off. He doesn't really want to do it, but he really wants a fucking pint. And so he like escapes and goes and get a pint, and then he comes back. And he's like, I'm not going to finish this. And he doesn't. And then it gets kind of dark at the end. He sells his watch because he needs beer money, and he goes to the pub with a bunch of other dudes, and they're just like drinking, and he's not getting as drunk as he wants to be, but he's clearly still drunk, because like when you get to the end of the story, it's like he ends up arm wrestling this this like young kid. I don't remember exactly how old, but someone younger than him, and he accuses the guy of cheating, basically. And so the guy goes and then he beats him again, and so he's all sad. And then he comes home and he's like, he sees his kid and he's like, "Where's your mom?" "She's out of the chapel." "That's right. Did she think of leaving any dinner for me?" "Yes, Pa, I light the lamp." "What do you mean by having the place in darkness? Are the other children in bed?" So he comes home, kind of drunk, terrible mood, and he takes it out on the kid. And a lot of the portraits of these Dubliners are not terribly positive. I mean, I think it's the beginning of or maybe even in the middle of a man losing. I think Joyce loved Dublin and he loved Ireland, but he was kind of pushed away from it and exiled later on. And I think this is kind of him starting to maybe not even start to recognize it, but starting to deal with that fact that maybe he needs to be somewhere else. Not entirely sure, but that's kind of how it feels with some of that. Ivy Day in the committee room is one of the stories where there's just a bunch of old dudes sitting around talking, and it's fantastic. I enjoyed it tremendously. They're just drinking and talking, and yeah, learned a new way to open a bottle of beer back when they were still corked. So the last story, and probably the most famous story in the collection, is The Dead. It's almost a novella, 50 pages long, and I think it's been published as a novella at times. It's on the shorter end for a novella. It's on the longer end for a short story. It's somewhere in there, probably technically a novelette or something like that. But I mean, it was like a slow burn situation. There's like bits near the beginning where Joyce, or not, main character's name is Gabriel, which I think in a lot of ways is a stand-in for Joyce to some extent. I could be misreading or overreading or whatever, but there's some really beautiful passages in here, especially near the end. There's this one scene where the protagonist and kind of narrator Gabriel is like they're at his party and everyone starts to leave, and he like kind of looks up and he sees his wife up on the stairs, just like super still listening to someone sing while someone plays the piano. And he said, "He stood still in the gloom of the hall, trying to catch the air that the voice was singing and gazing up at his wife. There was grace and mystery in her attitude, as if she were a symbol of something. He asked himself, what is a woman standing on the stairs in the shadow, listening to distant music, a symbol of? If he were a painter, he would paint her in that attitude. Her blue felt hat would show off the bronze of her hair against the darkness, and the dark panels of her skirt would show off the light ones. Distant music, he would call the picture if he were a painter." So there's just this moment where he's just standing up there looking at her. But then, of course, he comes home and he's horny as a motherfucker, which I think probably the reason I most associate Gabriel with Joyce is just the thoughts that are going through his head as they're heading home. And then they get home and he kind of like asks his wife why her mood changed so rapidly and why like she was so intense listening to that song. And she starts to tell him about this crush she had in her teenage years, this kind of first love of hers who ended up dying one night, and he used to sing that song to her. And so it's just this complete emotional switch around from this kind of crazy, mostly happy party with some light conflicts, as parties tend to have when there's more people there. You know, you run into someone you don't fully agree with or whatever. And it comes into this like kind of really emotional kind of climax. Not the climax that Gabriel wanted to have that night. But yeah, and then there's just some beautiful musings on like death, beautiful and kind of sad. One by one, they were all becoming shades. Better pass boldly into that other world in the full glory of some passion than fade and wither dismally with age. Generous tears filled Gabriel's eyes. He had never felt like that himself towards any woman, but he knew that such a feeling must be love. The tears gathered more thickly in his eyes, and in the partial darkness he imagined he saw the form of a young man standing under a dripping tree. Other forms were near. His soul had approached that region where dwell the vast hosts of the dead he was conscious of, but could not apprehend their wayward and flickering existence. His own identity was fading out into a gray, impalpable world. The solid world itself, which these dead had one time reared and lived in, was dissolving and dwindling. I mean, this man's entire life and how we thought about himself was upended in this moment, realizing that he was not his wife's first love. I watched a video of someone else talking about the story when I finished it, as I'm prone to do. I usually try to do it, after I make my own, so I'm not like influenced in my thoughts, but sometimes I like to get other people's thoughts and see like kind of how I feel about it. And if it does influence, I like to bring it up. But it's Adrian over at Strip Cover Lit was talking about this story. And he's talking about the big thing with like the identity like shift, that him realizing his wife was a person for the first time, which sounds insane. But then he went on to say, well, yeah, but also like think about your mom's life before you came along. Probably not. You're not like wondering where she was at 18 or 20 or whatever. So it makes some amount of sense. Like you don't necessarily think too much about what people did or where they were before they came into your life, which is just very interesting. But I also think this, there's more than just that. I think there's also like this sort of like him moving away from Ireland. There's a line earlier in the story where he gets kind of in this fight with this person because he's like, I'm not sure I love Ireland anymore. The character does. And then at the end, so yes, the newspapers were right. Snow was general all over Ireland. It was falling on every part of the dark central plain, on the treeless hills, falling softly upon the bog of Allen, and farther westward, softly falling into the dark, mutinous Shannon waves. It was falling, too, upon every part of the lonely churchyard on the hill where Michael Fury lay buried. It lay thickly drifted on the crooked crosses and headstones, on the spears of the little gate, on the barren thorns. His soul swooned slowly as he heard the snow falling faintly through the universe and faintly falling, like the descent of their last end upon all the living and the dead. And just before that, one of the reasons I read this was the line, and I started right after it, of course, said, the time had come for him to set out on his journey westward. That's the very end of Dubliners, is sort of this. Yeah, I don't know. It was very good. Like I said, I like the later stories better than the earlier ones. If you haven't read James Joyce, definitely give it a shot. I think Dubliners or Portrait of the Artist those are the places most people start with Joyce, and I think those are very sensible places to start. If you just want to read Ulysses, go for it. Don't take it too seriously, but probably take it slowly and make sure that you don't have to understand everything, but make sure you're kind of grasping where the people are and what is happening in the scene, which can be difficult to do if you're reading too fast, at least for me. So, yeah, this is one of my longer videos, but I'm just in a Joycean mood, I guess. So I don't think I'm going to tackle Finnegan's Wake quite yet. I'm reading back through Ulysses, of course, like I mentioned earlier. But someday I will move on to Finnegan's Wake and have to relearn everything, I'm sure. But yeah, that's it for now. Thanks for watching this long, if you are still around. And yeah, till next time.